Welcome to the Federal's latest episode of WorldlyVice, a program in which we attempt to focus on the nuts and bolts of trending international issues. Two reasons are possible for United States President Donald Trump limiting reciprocal tariffs to 10% for 90 days for all, except one, China. He has imposed a whopping 145% tariff on imports from China with immediate effect. The Trump administration possibly took a relook at the reciprocal tariffs in the light of requests from various countries. As Trump himself put it rather crudely, the world's leaders are kissing my you know what to review the tariffs. But the second reason is important and, in fact, seems to be at the heart of it all. Trump's original intention may have always been to impose reciprocal tariffs on China alone. Beijing was the real target. He had already done so in his first term. We shall come to this again later. According to the Financial Times, China is comfortably the world's trading superpower today. Its trade surplus rose to $1 trillion last year. No wonder Trump's action betray a sense of desperation. In response, China has turned out to be the only nation not to have pleaded with Trump or made any request for tariff rollback. The Xi Jinping government simply took Trump head-on, imposing its own tariff on the US, which stands now at 125%. Beijing completely ignored Trump's threat of increasing tariffs on China. What is it about China that makes it confident enough to take on the US shoulder to shoulder without flinching? In comparison, like most other governments around the world, the Indian government is attempting to reduce import tariffs from the US, negotiate with Washington, effectively playing the game the way Trump wants it. But China is taking Trump head on. If one looks at US-China relationship, this is not a big surprise. Besides Russia, China is the only nation that can stand in opposition to the US. As US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell was quoted as saying, China presents the top challenge to the United States in all of its history, surpassing the Cold War. Maybe, but there are contradictions galore in US-China relationship. The two are simultaneously the largest trading partners and the biggest rivals in the world today. Last year, the volume of trade between the US and China was almost $700 billion. From the time the US restored diplomatic ties with China in 1979, that is 44 years ago, the trade volume between the two has gone up by nearly 280 times, no less. The trade volume between the two today is 8 times more than that in 2001. In September 2008, China surpassed Japan as the biggest US creditor, holding around $600 billion worth US Treasury bonds. The US was able to keep afloat during the 2008 crash, largely due to Chinese money in its treasury. The irony that takes the cake is that China is today a veritable superpower because of the US. In the 1990s, US manufacturing started to move almost wholesale to China. American industrialists discovered that China had all the ingredients necessary: reliable infrastructure, cheap labor, and highly skilled workers to reduce the cost of product, thereby increasing their profits several fold. Over time, this exodus from the US turned China into a manufacturing powerhouse that has since continued in its trajectory, enabling it to reap profits and modernize the nation to a point where today it can challenge US hegemony. without blinking an eyelid. According to reports, China now manufactures one-third of all goods in the world, more than the US, Japan, Germany, and South Korea combined. Trump is trying to set the clock back with his reciprocal tariffs. He is on record saying the idea behind his tit-for-tat tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the US. In short, he is attempting to reverse the history of the last 30 years by turning a switch. It's either the height of brilliance and optimism or the pinnacle of stupidity. Analysts describe the US China relationship as Thucydidean, where an upstart is attempting to dethrone the master. Some call the relationship as equivalent to conjoined Siamese twins, joined at the hips, meaning one cannot do without the other. A look at the timeline in relations between the two shows how they continue to have a blow hot, blow cold, almost a spousal relationship. Tensions followed by functional peace, again followed by tensions. It goes on and on. For example, in November 2021, the two nations cooperated on climate change for the first time, signing an agreement during a UN climate summit in Glasgow. A Chinese official gushed, saying, "There are more agreements between the US and China than differences." In August 2022, the agreement was broken when US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi defied China and visited Taiwan. In November the same year, the two restored climate talks during a summit meeting between the then US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. In fact, throughout Trump's first term, his administration imposed tariff upon tariffs on Chinese imports. There were restrictions as well, like when Trump, in the last week of his first term, blacklisted China's largest chip maker, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, SMIC. Each time China retaliated, never giving in. Reconciliations and reliefs too occurred, alternating with increases in tariffs. Their relationship, as we said before, is probably the most complex, or to put it mildly, borders on absurdity. Yet, you have Trump shake the entire world in the process of trying to cut to size or neutralize China. The size of the Chinese economy and the trade surplus it enjoys with most nations, especially with the US, makes Trump's task almost near impossible. It is the equivalent of Trump standing with a water hose trying to put out the recent California wildfires. Incidentally, China is not a Johnny-come-lately in becoming a big power. Until about 2 centuries ago, it was the world's biggest economic power. From the 9th to the 15th century, China dominated the world. In the 12th century, China experienced industrial revolution, some 600 years before it occurred in Britain. According to historians, large-scale factory production and water-powered machinery for textile and paper making were already in use in major cities. Iron production touched 250 million tons by around the 11th century, when most parts of the world were still battling primitive savagery. Under the Chinese Song dynasty in this period, there were at least 3 large urban centers with over 100,000 population each. In comparison, the West had only one, Constantinople. Gunpowder, the compass, and the printing press were Chinese game changers when the rest of the world was still involved in tribal conflicts. China rode high until British colonialism hit it hard in the 19th century. The British, who had already occupied India, used the colony to grow poppy, and during what is known as the Opium Wars, managed to weaken China and bring it to its knees. Almost all European colonizers managed to occupy parts of a compromised China, creating settlements and spheres of influence. Japan captured and occupied a large chunk of Manchuria and other parts of China, all of which it let go after its defeat in the Second World War. The success of the Communist Revolution under Chairman Mao Zedong is interpreted by some as the people's reaction to foreign occupation during the period between the first and the end of the Second World War. In the 70s, the US inadvertently helped China recover and rise again. Today, it has grown into such a vast power with an intricate and extensive network that there is literally no part of the world where Beijing does not wield substantial economic power. To subvert Trump's tariff moves, China exports goods and has opened franchisee manufacturing units right across the world in Vietnam, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, and Thailand, among others. These China-backed outlets manufacture finished products from most components received from China and then export them to the US, preventing high tariffs from being imposed on them as they are technically not made in China. To beat this, Trump this time has introduced reciprocal tariffs on everyone, friends and foes alike. Direct Chinese imports into the US have decreased since Trump's tariffs in his first term, but imports into the US from other countries have risen, a large proportion using original components from China. One reason why China's trade surplus with most other nations is on the rise. The flooding of Chinese goods into the rest of the world brings more worries to countries whose domestic manufacturing gets affected by this. But that's a different story. As far as Trump is concerned, the resistance from other nations to spiraling Chinese imports could help the US's pushback against China. It's probably a little early to judge which way the tide will turn at this point. But one outcome is clear. The world should brace itself for at least a medium-term economic turmoil in this fight between two of the world's top powers. Thank you.